Good afternoon. Welcome everybody to our session today on creating an SAP data strategy. My name's Ed Girders. I'm the host. The conversations, the discussions, the expertise will be shared by John Conti, who is the VP of our Systems Landscape Optimizations for the Americas region. John has over 2 decades of work with SAP. Started with them in 1991, worked with global logistics implementations, and rose to be the director of SRM out of Palo Alto. As I said, he is currently our vice president of SLO practice for EPI-USE labs. Before I turn it over to John, I wanted to address questions. So currently everybody's on mute. If you'd like to ask a question, there is a question box over on the right-hand side of your screen in the GoToMeeting area. Simply open that box up, type in your question, and hit send. And John will do his best to answer that question at the end of the session today, or we'll certainly follow up with you after our presentation. But with that said, I'm now going to turn it over to John to begin our conversation on creating an SAP data strategy. Welcome, John. How are you?
Thanks. I'm fine, Ed. Thank you so much for the nice introduction. Let me get my presentation up and running here and get it into a full display mode here. There we go. Okay. So, as Ed was mentioning, I've been doing SAP for more than 2 decades, about 23 years, and I have both a business and technical background because I've implemented SAP and also developed custom solutions for many customers such as HP and Intel, Chevron, etc. And now I'm here to talk to you about a data strategy. So getting right into it, I think it's important for us to try to visualize the problem. Okay? And the problem is as such. So when you just start with SAP, life is good. Assuming you survived go live, you have a dev, a QA, and a prod system, and they're pretty much well aligned because you're just starting with SAP. Now some time goes by, and what happens is that the production system starts growing, and the users need to have good data in QA, and the QA data now it starts to get a little bit older, and it starts getting a little bit consumed. So some of the transactional data starts getting used and so forth. And because of that, there is essentially an event, which is what the technical infrastructure folks, the basis folks do for you, which is that they do a QA refresh. And what a QA refresh is basically a full copy of production. And now you notice that you have prod and you have good data in queue, but now your overall footprint is increasing because now QA reflects prod, and the dev data is getting even older because you haven't even touched that. Okay? Now, time goes by again, and your prod also increases in terms of data, and you have always really good data, right? In prod, you have the best data. And the QA now starts getting old, right? And dev is still the oldest. So you start getting this data quality disparity across systems. And there's always, for all the individual projects, you know, you have the demand from the users. Can someone create data for my project? I don't know if data in this particular client is good enough. Can you create me a new client with production data? So this discussion starts happening again and more frequently. And the hard thing is that this cycle kind of continues, where the solution is, oh, let's do a QA refresh again, and prod continues to grow, and so forth. Now, if this wasn't enough, this is your ECC stack, right? Your enterprise system, your core SAP system. Most customers don't have just ECC. They have CRM, they have SRM, they might have BW, and on top of that, they might have PI for integration, and non-SAP systems as well. And of course, these systems are also integrated. So what this leads to is that, you don't have just one landscape, you have many landscapes to deal with. Okay? This magnifies the problem of the footprint significantly and also of the data. And a lot of companies don't have a simple 3-system landscape. Some of them have a 4-system or a 5-system landscape. Some of them have a multi-track landscape. So this really adds a lot of complexity and issues around optimizing your landscape. And in addition, they're also integrated. So this increases the refresh times, because when you try to do a QA refresh from production, you not only are copying prod, but you have to reconnect and reintegrate that prod copy and point the new QA system to the other QA instances. So this increases the refresh times and complicates data creation as well. Okay? So to restate, that's trying to visualize the problem. To restate it in terms of business challenges is that you have old inconsistent data in testing, in your QA systems, in training and dev environments. Okay? You have long downtimes for system copy, rebuild, and refreshes. You also have non-optimized data storage. So you're using too much storage, basically. Right? And additionally, you might have data security and compliance risks. So if you do third-party outsourced support, you might be giving access to sensitive data. Also, HR data is very sensitive. Some financial data is very sensitive, depending on, which system and production systems are open and are controlled by authorizations, SAP authorizations. But in QA systems, you should probably also try to scramble or anonymize some of that data. And at the end of the day, the users don't have good data when and where they need it. And that's really, at the end of the day, I think, priority one. So when we talk about building an SAP data strategy, what do we mean by that? What we mean is exactly this. It has to encompass an approach to provide usable data to users in a reliable and consistent fashion. It's got to also encompass how to implement a continuous landscape optimization approach that reduces the footprint, reduces the refresh times, and optimizes client usage. Think HANA now, because it's coming down, and companies are adopting it. It's just a matter of time before more and more companies come. And you really should try to get your landscape in shape, because most companies don't have the luxury to be carrying a lot of data, historical data, data that could have been archived into a memory architecture that HANA supports. And finally, you need to ensure that there is data consistency across the integrated SAP landscape. So these are the 3 core elements of what we believe a data strategy should contain. Now we talk about users. So what are the characteristics that users need, if you will? They need to have data that's predictable. So they need to know which data is going to be available. So is it just a client that just has customizing data? Is it the client that has just master data? Or does it also have transactional data? Okay. They also have to know in which systems. Are you talking about in a pre-prod system for UAT testing? Also in a QA system? How fresh and clean is that data? When was it copied from production? And that gets into the when part, which is on what schedule. So it has to be predictable, and it has to have answers to what, where, and when. And finally, even if you can put this all in a schedule and have it working like a nice machine, there are many cases where users need data on demand, okay, to move specific data as needed. And this would be an example for production support, where you find an issue in production with making a change to a sales order. You need to replicate that sales order and all of its related objects, such as the customers and the products and the product hierarchies and everything that might go along with the sales order, into a QA system for testing to try to replicate that production problem in order to attempt to solve it. Okay. If you can provide predictable and on-demand data, this really allows users to plan their projects, their testing, their training, and provide support in a reliable and consistent way. Now, to the second part of the strategy, the continuous landscape optimization. So it must be continuous because data is always changing in production, and it's always being consumed in QA and in training and dev. And what I mean by consumed is that transactional data, for example, once you have a sales order, you create the sales order and then you do a delivery. Okay? From a delivery, you do the part of the goods issue, the picking the goods issue, and then you create an invoice. You can't reuse that sales order. It's already been used as part of a process. Okay, so that's what I mean by consumption. Okay, so this optimization must be continuous, right? And data needs to move from production downstream to the landscapes periodically, right? So on, let's say, on a quarterly schedule, you're always refreshing these systems, okay? And down the entire stream, not just stopping at QA. Okay. In terms of footprint reduction, these data volumes in production are always increasing, and really using the full copy approach for QA refresh really exacerbates this problem pretty horribly, actually. So really what we need to do is put in place a mechanism where you have continuous archiving. So highly recommend that you start on your archiving projects. You also need the capabilities to be able to time slice production instead of a full copy. Okay, so typically you only need a year or maybe 13 months worth of data from production back into QA to do all the testing and all the validations that you do, that you need. Okay, and instead of refreshing entire systems, what you should be able to do and need to do actually is just to refresh clients and refresh it in the pre-prod and QA and dev with sliced data from production instead of the entire copy. Right? And the third element is to ensure data consistency across systems. Okay? So as I mentioned before, most customers don't just have ECC ERP, they have CRM, SRM, SCM, BW, and so forth. And they're all integrated in copying data from a single system may cause these inconsistencies. So you need to be able to do data extracts and loads in a temporal synchronicity. That means that you have to do the extractions at the same point in time. Okay? And because there are interfaces and integration across these systems, you need to understand what these are, and they need to be typically first cleared and then paused during the extracts and loads so that you don't have data changing across these systems as you're making these copies and loads. So in terms of a strategy design, okay, the most important thing from the beginning is to actually do a design, a document for your SAP landscape. So you create a document that describes the landscape from an integrated view. So basically you define all of the components that you have. Okay, you have ERP, you have the SRM, you have SCM, maybe you have a PFCD, and then you define all the clients in each one and how they're connected. Okay, and then there's also a component view of this, which includes each client and their purpose. What is the intent and usage of those particular clients? And then you actually then design your data refresh strategy, which takes into consideration the integration across the systems, the components, and the different clients. And I'll get a little bit more detail into that. But everyone needs to first design that. You would think that if systems, landscapes are always evolving, and you need to be able to take a snapshot and define all of your systems and how they're all interconnected and put it on a map. Okay? And once you have that, then you can start talking about a data refresh strategy. And once you define the data refresh strategy, you can design the data refresh schedule based on that strategy. So a data refresh schedule would be nothing more than basically a calendar that you can publish to your users that specifies on which days systems are going to be refreshed, and in which systems and in which data we're talking about in terms of refreshing. Okay? That's already a very powerful document and will go a long way to meet the requirements of your users. So the SAP landscape documents, the integrated ones, I was just talking a little bit about that. You know, it needs to define all systems, clients, and connectivities across all landscapes. And it essentially becomes the integration blueprint. It's a model for the connectivity and integration, and it's also a validation and checkpoints for the basis teams to make sure that they've done all the integration across all these systems. And the component landscape excuse me, defines all systems and clients that are of an SAP component, and defines the purpose and content for each client, and it becomes a component landscape blueprint, one for each SAP component. And this is used to define the data refresh strategy within each system, not just the integration across systems, but within. Right? What is the purpose of each particular client, and how are they used, and how do we need to refresh that data? Okay? Both of these documents are really critical because they really become the key communication documents across all departments. And they need to be published openly, and they're living documents with links to more detailed documentation. So what would a integrated data refresh and the strategy look like? So based on an integrated landscape document, we just talked about that one, okay, it would define all the related components and the fact that they have to be refreshed in parallel. Okay, so it would be ERP plus SRM plus PSED, or whatever combinations that you have in your landscape. So the data that's extracted from production systems would move into subsequent systems in a cascading chain. So from prod to pre-prod to QA to training to dev. Now that chain might change a little bit. Maybe you don't have a training system. Maybe you go from QA to dev. Maybe you don't have a pre-prod, but you get the idea. Okay. And each SAP component needs to contain a base client which contains the production data. So each SAP component essentially has a special client to hold that refresh data. Okay, that's a key concept here. And this base client is used to populate use clients. So the base client essentially just has the copy from production, and then we copy the base client into usage clients. Okay? And I'll get into a little bit more detail about what I mean by that. And the frequency, the content, and the scramble profiles of the base extracts need to be published as part of that master data refresh master schedule, which would tell pretty much to the end user, to the business folks, what systems are getting updated when, and with what data, and what's getting scrambled, and in what frequency, of course. So what does that look like? Okay. So this is a diagram that covers the different aspects of that base client refresh concept. So imagine you are in Q1, and basically you can take you can go back a year, you can go back 13 months with the transactional data. To ensure that you have a consistent system, you need to grab all the master data that's related to the transactional data and all the customizing data. And if you're running HR, you might want all HR data. Okay? So that would be the extract profile that you do in Q1 prime, going back to Q1. And you need to do this in parallel according to your landscape. So in this case, we have SRM, ERP, and eRecruit. And every quarter we would do this refresh. And you would, with this 13-month refresh, we would load it into pre-production and then perhaps do some scrambling in QA. So pre-production and QA would have 13 months of data. Now, training and dev don't need to have that much data. Okay, typically, 3 months of data or slightly over every quarter would be fine for a training and for a dev system. So we could do that as well and scramble that data. So we further slice what we put into QA and load it into the training and the dev, and just grab a quarter's worth of data or the previous quarters. Okay, so that would be basically the kind of diagrammatic representation of the different aspects of a refresh. The periodicity of it, the length of the data, the kind of the data, the systems, and the flow of the data across the landscape. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit what happens at the client level. Okay. So assuming that each system contains this base client, and this is refreshed based on the integrated refresh strategy we just discussed. Okay. So this base client is imported and, if necessary, scrambled. Okay. And it's part of the original extract from production. Okay. This base client is used as a reference, and it's non-changeable, to refresh additional clients within that component stack. Okay. So to do this, of course, we need to have a map of all the clients and their usage. And we talked about that as part of the component document, the component landscape document. And we can think about actually 3 kinds of clients, right? Use client, which means that you can actually use the data in that client. A retain client, which is a client that says, I want to create data that I might use again and again and again. And we have a base client, which is a copy from production. With these 3 clients, okay, we can build what I call a blended data client, which is a combination of the base client, which is the production data, plus the retained data. So if you want to have special users for training or for testing, or some predefined sets of, let's say, POs that you want to blend with the copy, you can do that. You can do it with the idea of the blended data client. Okay. You could have a base data client as well, right? Which is basically a copy of the non-changeable base client, and you can actually use it. Or you can have a use data copy, which is for retaining the particular usage. So these are some of the patterns. Okay, a blended case is where you take the base, okay, you create use based on the base, and then you import, let's say, users, and you have certain users you wanted to retain. You can move them into the use clients, right? And you might want to also import additional objects, particular master data or transactional data objects that you want to retain. Now, as far as the users, you could have had them in the retain client, or you might also do synchronization via CUA using the CUA master client. The base use client is basically a copy from the base client where you can use, and optionally you might import data for the retain or not. And finally, the usage client, where we just copy from the retain client into a use client for you to be able to make changes. And we're actually not leveraging the base client at all. But these 3 patterns will cover pretty much most of the scenarios, if not all the scenarios that you need in terms of having data in a client that would be usable for your constituents. Now that being said, you need to have a consistent numbering scheme for your clients, and maybe you might need to do some changes. So different clients have different numbers across the different landscape components, and they typically have some different purposes depending on the type of system. So in dev, the idea is to have a base client. Your XY1 might be your development, your XY2 might be development unit testing, 3 and 4 to be defined. 5 could be for the data management team, so playing around with the base data, copying it into 5, scrambling it, validating it, and then moving it into the dev unit testing, for example. Okay, 6 is TBD, 7 through 9 is TBD. That's in the dev stack. On the QA stack, you would have a base client, and maybe your XY1 would be for functional testing. XY2 is the integration testing, and this is the one that would have interface and integration points to the other QA components for the between ERP and HCM and SRM, for example. So that would be for integration testing. Okay. Again, the same pattern for the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 as dev is pretty much TBD. On a training client, or training component, I should say, same idea, base. 1 would be a training, 2 would be for integration-based training, 3, 4 TBD, 5 would be reserved for the data management team, 6 would be the retained testing data. So we talked about that retain client. That would be this particular client where users can create data so that they can reuse into a blending client, which would be the training and the integration training, right? So the training and the integration training would be a blend between the base and the routine data. Visually, this would look like this, where we would load the data on the training system into the base client. Okay, the data management team has access to that and maybe get a copy of that in Scramble. But then the base clients could be copied into the functional training, the X41 that you see there. Okay, the integration training might have a combination of base plus the retained data, the X46. Okay, so there are different options of how to blend and build the different clients that you have. And so a very similar thing on the QA, that you have a base and you copy that base down to for functional testing and for integration testing. Okay, so that basically lays out a overall strategy for, let me just go back and then talk about the components. Let's go, you know, so, we talked about, what a strategy needed to contain, and it's a mechanism to provide usable data to the users in a reliable and consistent fashion. And to just recap what we've done here, we talked about essentially putting on a calendar schedule for the user the times when the different systems are going to get copied from production, right? And we also talked about the fact that they would, you would define what kind of data would be copied from production, right? And also gave them the options to be able to move the data in an ad hoc form, okay, as they needed for production support and so forth. Right? So this would basically give them the data that they need, and if they have a published schedule, they can actually run their projects and work around that data based on those data refreshes at the client level. Okay? So we talked about that. As far as a continuous landscape and how to optimize that, we talked about the importance of starting if you haven't already done so, archiving approach and making sure that that's being done continuously, and also having the capability to time slice data from production so that you can use smaller footprints into your QA and into your dev systems and perhaps into your training or your pre-prod systems. Okay? So that's a very important piece of doing it all together. And also we talked about the client usage. You know, how would you go about that and ensuring that you have data that you need for the users based on what they actually need, and using the retained client plus a base client and blending that data to provide the data that the users need in their particular systems. And then finally, we talked a little bit about how to ensure data consistencies across an integrated landscape. And essentially, you have to basically extract and load the data in synchronicity across these systems. And you also have to scramble them consistently across the systems. And that's a very important part as well for an overall strategy. So I believe I covered all the key points, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about EPI-USE. We are, SAP data experts. We have been doing this for more than 15 years in developing tools and have deep expertise in the SAP data architecture, and we've been developing products for that long as well. We belong to a group of over 1,000 employees called the EPI-USE group. I specifically, and Ed as well, work for the EPI-USE Labs group where we develop the products. We have over 700 customers globally. We have 24-hour support every workday. And as far as labs is concerned, we have over 100 employees, and 40% of them are R&D. They're developers and architects. And the rest are support, testing, and services. So that's a little bit about us. And I'd like to talk a little bit about Data Sync Manager, which is our tool for being able to manage SAP data. So you probably are aware of what the SAP data architecture looks like, and we have everything in blue here is basically what we call client independent, and that means it doesn't really contain business data, but it contains the source code, the repository, the data dictionary. There is some level of client independent customizing, a couple of special clients in the system, 00066, and then above that is where we actually have the clients that contain business data. And there's 3 layers of data and kind of users on the side as well. We have customizing that controls the behavior of the system, as well as a number of data aspects that drive the behavior of master data and also of the transactional data. Okay, so those are the 3 kind of interdependent layers within SAP. And of course, SAP allows you to do multiple clients within an instance. So we've built a tool called System Builder. It's one of the components of System Data Sync Manager. And System Builder will be able to copy just the shell of any SAP, any ABAP-based SAP component. Okay? It's a very efficient way of making just a system copy without making a full copy of the entire system, leaving all the other clients behind, except the client independent and the 000 and the 066. Then we also have Client Sync, which is a very powerful tool that allows you to copy a full client or to do slicing of the transactional data based on time. So going back from today backwards a quarter or backwards a year or whatever temporal length that you want. Okay? So this will allow you to do time slices and basically take smaller chunks of that client and then import it into a new system, a new client, or an existing system as a new client, or on top of an existing client, which would then actually needs to be deleted, and our tool has that capability as well. And Client Sync also has the ability to do enterprise-based slicing for testing purposes. So if you're training, if you want to build training data only for Europe, you could filter based on the European sales organization or maybe the European company code. That's Client Sync. And then finally, we have Object Sync. And Object Sync is the tool that allows you to copy individual selected transactions and or master data on demand. So you can be in production and you say, I want to copy that PO, and I also want to copy the requisition that came along with that PO, and also the vendor that's associated with that PO. And copy that and move it into QA or into dev, for example. And we have over 700 objects defined in ERP, and it's a highly extensible and very powerful tool. Its foundations are at the core of our entire data sync manager, which is the business object repository, where we've modeled all of the SAP components. And that's Object Sync. And then finally, we have Data Secure. And Data Secure allows you to do in-place scrambling of sensitive data. And what that means is that we can take a client that exists and specify what you want to scramble, and it could be any table, any field, and you can clear that field, you can assign a particular value, you can look it up on a table, you can generate a random value for it. It's also integrated with Object Sync and Client Sync. So for example, when you do Client Sync, when you do the import into your target system, it will scramble the data based on the profile that you've defined in Data Secure. Okay? Object Sync also has the ability to scramble data, and that's at the object level. You can specify which fields you want to scramble. We have some predefined scrambling options for most of our objects, and if that doesn't suffice for a particular customer, they can go in and easily extend that object to add additional capabilities in terms of scrambling the data. And it's tuned, of course, to do large volumes of data and do it in parallel. So basically, these four tools allows you to actually deploy that strategy that we discussed. Data Sync Manager works for ERP, works for SRM, for CRM, for BW, for GTS. So for most of the ABAP stack type component solutions that SAP provides. Okay, so I think that's the end of my presentation. Ed, if you'd like to take it.
Thank you, John.
Sure.
It was a lot, as I said from the onset. You can tell those number of years experience certainly come through in John's discussions as he's talking about developing that data strategy, where that data is stored, and setting schedules and the end users. Again, very, very well done. Thank you, John. I'm leaving you all with John's contact information. So if you'd like to, if there was something there that you would like to talk to John about to continue the conversation, you certainly can send him an email. If you're looking for more information around that topic, we do have information on our website. If you are out attending this month's Tech Ed conference, John will be there as well. And please, we invite you to stop by the booth, continue the conversation, and pick John's brain some more. If you are social, if you're out there on the Twitter, you can reach John and tweet him a question. You can also follow John or EPI-USE Labs as we share information to you about these subjects, data copy, data strategy, and topics like that. But with no questions, this would conclude our broadcast today. I'd like to thank John Conti for presenting this. I'd like to thank everybody who took the time to attend this session. We will record it and send you a link to the recording so you can review it again. But on behalf of John Conti and EPI-USE Labs, I'd like to thank you. Have a great day, and goodbye, everybody.